On Friday the 13th, the world almost ended. Lucas, I know you've been tracking this story very closely. So we're looking at a video that Scott Ritter did. He's a Marine. Yeah, can you help us understand a little bit about what happened? And this seems pretty serious. Like the last time I remember something along these lines, or at least the first thing that comes to memory is the Cuban Missile Crisis that happened back in the 60s.
We may have come closer to a nuclear war than the Cuban Missile Crisis. But let's start with who Scott Ritter is. Scott Ritter first came on my radar a couple of months ago because as the war has continued with Ukraine and due to the wonderful world of X, I came across him and I was impressed. I guess it was about the time that Tucker Carlson gave an interview with Vladimir Putin, and I think it's very important for us to know what all the countries and all the people of the world are thinking. And if we're going to get along with the world, I think it's very important to engage in discourse. So in the wake of that, I was looking as to what Americans, and especially Americans who have experience with United States diplomacy and military operations, who amongst them was engaging in conversation with Russia, and I came across Scott Ritter. So fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, we actually mentioned Scott Ritter on the show, and that was because the FBI raided Scott Ritter's home on August the 7th, and they have the Department of Justice is claiming that Scott Ritter is a mouthpiece for Russia, for giving interviews with Russia Today. So that's who Scott Ritter is, and so I follow him. I listen to what he's saying, and I noticed in the news that we have seen very little of Joe Biden also since he withdrew from the upcoming election, and we've seen a lot from Kamala Harris since then. But September the 13th, leading into that, I saw that Keir Starmer was coming to Washington. I thought that very interesting because our special relationship with the United Kingdom and also the recent election that went there. Keir Starmer was recently elected the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. So I had an eye on that. And then when I found out what that meeting was about and what occurred diplomatically leading into it, I was shocked. And what Keir Starmer was coming to do was to ask for approval from the United States to fire missiles deep into Russian territory. And we actually have a clip of Scott Ritter describing that. So I don't want to waste our time. I think he puts it much better, especially with regards to the diplomatic conversations that occurred leading into that meeting. But Scott states, and I believe that if we had or do begin to bomb the interior of Russia, then we are going to have a hot war that gets really, really, really hot and maybe melts the world down. So here's the video. I'll let you go ahead and cue this up. This is Scott Ritter having a conversation with a Russian. Perish the thought.
Knows that you can't attack Russia without American fingers touching it, and they say we don't want to be a party to this conflict because we trust the Russians when they say there will be consequences. They'll take out Kiev, but then they're going to take out sites in England, in Brussels, in Germany, and in the United States. And they made it clear this is going to happen instantly. The decisions have already been made. We will automatically do it. You can't stop it. So I'm trying to emphasize this point, Judge, because on Saturday morning, every American got up and went off and did their business. We almost all died on Saturday.
Grant, we lost the sound.
And this resonates a lot, really. Скотт, у меня несколько вопросов.
And we have such a question. What did you, how did you came up to the conclusion that this is exactly what is going to happen if American administration allows Ukraine to strike deep within Russian territory?
Well, I didn't come up with it. The Russian government came up with it. Vladimir Putin on Thursday night said that if this happens, if Ukraine uses British-made Storm Shadows or American-made ATACMS that are targeted only, and President Putin pointed this out, they can only be used using information that has been provided to them by the United States, by NATO, and the technical characteristics of the weapons are such that it can only be loaded into the weapons by NATO or American hands. He said, you will become a party to the conflict, and with all that that means. I tend to believe the Russian president with these when he speaks. Maybe there's some people who don't believe him. But when he says you will become a party to the conflict and all the consequences that accrue from that, I tend to believe that that means that we become part of the war and that Russia will respond. Now, he said that on Thursday, but on Friday, Joe Biden still was meeting with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, who brought a package of documents that included America signing off on the Storm Shadow British missile being used against Russian targets. Not just for approval. I think everybody knows. You remember, look, we know because the Russians intercepted a German consultation online where the Germans were talking about the Taurus missile and how Germany would have to be involved in the targeting of the Taurus missile. And the Germans said the British are already in Ukraine doing this. They're already in Ukraine doing this. Every time the Storm Shadow is fired by Ukraine, the British loaded the targets in it. Those targets can only be developed by the United States. And so the United States is already providing the British with the targets that they load into the Storm Shadow and they fire against the Russians. But right now it's limited to Crimea. It's limited to the Donbass, to Zaporizhia and Kherson. They haven't fired against Russia proper yet, but the British are already there doing this. So when I say to you that Keir Starmer had a target list already approved, asking the President of the United States to sign off on it, the British are already in Ukraine. They would have launched those missiles Friday night. That's 100% guaranteed. On Friday, because Biden was having this meeting, the Russians interjected at least two more times. One was the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, who in a session of the Security Council, underscoring the importance of this, basically said that if Biden signs this document and the British fire the Storm Shadows, it will be an act of war. The NATO will become a party to the conflict. And then to back this up, the Russian ambassador to the United States, Anatoly Antonov, gave a press conference, or he spoke to, I think it was Russia 24, and he said, the United States operates under this impression that this conflict will be limited to Europe, and that even a nuclear conflict would be limited to Europe, that the United States can sit back and rest easy because it won't be touched. He said any conflict will touch the United States, that if the United States does this, their fingers will be burned. Don't play with fire. These two statements are alarming because it shows the seriousness of which Russia is warning the United States and Europe not to do this. And Sergei Lavrov followed up. He said, we don't want a nuclear war. But he said, we have the weapons right now on operational readiness to be fired right now that will destroy Kiev and by extension, any other party to the conflict. Now, these aren't nuclear weapons, I don't believe. These are conventional weapons of a strategic nature. It's hypothesis on my part, but I would believe that these are probably, you know, the Kinzhals, the Zircons, the avant-garde. These are all weapons that can do extreme damage with non-nuclear weapons. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because this is where I think Russia is miscalculating. You see, Russia thinks that and they have every right to. If you're a party to the conflict, you're a party to the conflict. And if you want to join the conflict, you pay the price. Russia thinks that it can strike Ukraine decisively and hit targets in the United Kingdom and NATO with conventional munitions, strategic in nature, but conventional, and limit the conflict. But what will happen automatically is that NATO will strike Russia using its conventional strategic strike capabilities. And this will be devastating to Russia, just like the Russian attack will be devastating. And then Russia will respond with even more conventional actions that will threaten NATO existentially. And when that happens, and this is where Russia, I think, is miscalculated, the United States will preemptively strike Russia with nuclear weapons. That's our doctrine. That's how we've organized ourselves. If you threaten NATO existentially, if you strike the United States conventionally, we will carry out a preemptive nuclear attack against Russia. Not, I used to think it was escalate to de-escalate, that we would use one or two low-yield nuclear weapons. But that's not our doctrine. Our doctrine is to strategically strike Russia preemptively to destroy Russia's strategic nuclear capabilities, their missiles and their silos, etc., in an effort to weaken Russia so much that Russia will surrender without striking. Now, this is where we miscalculate, because Russia won't surrender. They will strike us with their strategic nuclear capabilities, and then we all die, which is what I said would happen in a second. And this will happen this quick. It's not going to be phone calls, talking. Decisions have been made. Doctrines are in order. It is automatic. Once the storm shadow is launched against Russia, it begins a sequence of events that inevitably ends with the destruction of the world. That's why I said what I said.
And here I wanted to insert Danish Prime.
I think that's probably good, Grant.
Okay.
So Scott basically lays out the events that occurred on Friday, September the 13th, and fortunately did not occur on Saturday, the 14th. But that is the state of the escalation of the conflict that has been going on in the Ukraine, and the collapse of the guise that this is a Ukrainian war. We have long talked about the United States interference or creation of the conflict with the incitement of the revolution and the installation of Vladimir Zelensky as the president of the Ukraine. The CIA has been in for several years. There was a revelation earlier this year as to the training that they had been engaging with the United States troops. With Ukrainian troops, to begin to build up their capacity to fight Russia on our behalf. So the absolution that we have taken in saying this was a Ukrainian motive and a Ukrainian war is dissolving, and it is beyond time for the United States and NATO to come to the table and to realize the folly in what they've done in the Ukraine.
Well, and to recap what he said in the video, so the idea here wasn't that it would be an immediate use of nuclear weapons as a result of the treaty, but rather that he's following the series of steps that would occur because of the doctrines already laid out of what would happen if we were to be hit with conventional weapons, which would ultimately result in the use of nuclear weapons.
Yes, but you know, the amount of time that occurs in between the during the escalation of this conflict is not weeks, not days, but minutes. You know, the missiles, the missiles and the technology that we have to deliver conventional and nuclear warheads anymore are not, you know, they're not flying at 5 times the speed of sound. They're flying at 20 to 29 times the speed of sound. And there's a this
is what was referred to, but recently in the whole hypersonic missile thing, right? Whether a hypersonic missile had been used. Is this the sort of penultimate of the intercontinental attack?
Yes, and Russia has been developing hypersonic missiles for quite some time in order to beat. You know, the United States had stealth technology and used that to great avail as we were coming out of the Cold War, the Hobble Goblin, the F-117A, interesting plane. And before that had used the likes of the SR-71 Blackbird, which flew high above the ICBMs of the time. The U-2 did also until one got shot down. So in response to the stealth technology and the amount of air bases and air defense systems that we have, they created these incredibly fast missiles. And not only incredibly fast missiles, but some of these hypersonic missiles aren't the lob technique that we usually think of when we think of ICBMs, but they stick close to the ground and they hide behind air defense capabilities by virtue of the curvature of the Earth and the terrain of the world. So Russia has a great number of them. I'm not sure of the actual numbers that they have, but we saw one in use earlier this month. We saw one launched from Yemen by the Houthis and launched towards Israel. And Israel has one of the most advanced air defense systems, their Iron Dome system, and the Iron Dome was not able to keep that missile from hitting. I think it did. I guess another thing that these advanced hypersonic missiles can do is, you know, while flying at many times the speed of sound, they have thrusters that give them they give them avoidance capabilities as they get nearer and closer to their target, so they can avoid anti-aircraft fire. Or other measures that are taken against them. And so I'm not sure if the hypersonic missile that was launched by Yemen by the Houthis and probably given to them by Russia, maybe given to them by Iran. I'm not sure what the intelligence is there, but they did use one and they did get through Israel's Iron Dome. So, you know, there was also, I'm not sure if Scott in that clip that we heard, I'm not sure if he used the phrase escalate to de-escalate. I think he did so with regards to.
He did. He did say that, yeah.
Okay, well, and he also, I think, in the wake of that, talked about how our policy has shifted from escalate to de-escalate to preemptive strikes. I don't know if you've been tracking what has been going on in with Hezbollah and Israel. In the last couple of days, but Israel has used this term escalate to de-escalate also, and that was their legitimization for, actually, I don't know, well, they would also say that the attacks that they've made in Lebanon were not preemptive, but a response to actions taken by Hezbollah against Israel already. So, but anyway, they are escalating to de-escalate by going after, in a much stronger way, the resistance to Israel that exists in Lebanon. And So we this gives me a lot of concern. I've been worried that we are going to see things get out of hand, more so than they already are in Israel and in Ukraine. At the very least, we have driven security partners away from the United States in our support of Israel and our support of NATO in their war against Russia.
I think there's a slightly different terminology that's being used these days, because I was trying to see how much that particular phrase was being used, but I think I found something as I was looking through on X, instead saying de-escalation through escalation. So maybe that's the way it's being referred to now.
That is the traditional the traditional language, the abusive language to take the active voice out of language to make it the other party's fault. De-escalation through, yes. So anyway, still a cause for concern, and it's sad to me that in the meantime, our narrative in the elections of the United States are pivoting around immigration and around cats and dogs in Ohio, when there are much greater things at stake here.
Well, I mean, it has been talked about by more politically savvy individuals. I think Kennedy was talking about this, right? If I recall, the last time we talked about how close to nuclear war the world really is, kind of hanging on the edge of.
Well, a couple of things, yes, have our candidates have not been ignoring the issue, but it's more so a lot of the populace doesn't want to grapple, wants to look away from hard decisions and dirty things, and also a coming to grips with the notion that the United States is not has a strong military but can't have its way with impunity throughout the world. So a couple of things have happened. Yes, Robert Kennedy has been talking a lot about the danger of nuclear war and the danger of our international policy, especially with the likes of Russia. I'm not sure if it was in a response to the information from Scott Ritter, but Kennedy gave a great interview with Scott Ritter, I believe on Sunday, so 2 days after this meeting, and he and Donald Trump Jr., with the approval and the cognizance of the Trump campaign, issued an open letter. I'm not sure where it was published, probably in the New York Times, maybe in the Washington Post, but a letter calling attention to what Keir Starmer was asking of Biden and the danger of nuclear war. So Kennedy has been on it. Trump, we heard him in his conversation with Elon Musk, was the first that I heard him address his fears with regards to nuclear war and how dangerous.
Right. I remember that actually being the case. That's a good point. That came up in the conversation about it was in the long form X where they were on for 4 or 6 hours, right? That's the one.
Oh, not 4 to 6 hours. I think it may have been right under 2 hours. But yes, and that was my favorite part of that conversation, or the most heartening part of it to me, was hearing Trump really put a pin on the danger of nuclear war, and not only that, but how important it was to him. Remember, he talked about not just his, he said. So he said to Elon Musk, if I had been in office, we would have never gotten here. And Elon Musk responded to him, and he said, yeah, because you're a strong man. And Trump immediately doubled back, and he said, I had rapport with all of these leaders, and he went on to talk about his dealings with North Korea and Kim Jong-un, and he said Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un and every other leader of every nation in the world loves their country, just like I love America. And he said, you have to understand that, and you have to understand that these people love their country, and that if we go into a war, it's good for none of us. And I thought that was a moment in which Donald Trump absolutely shone. And he takes a lot of flack for, his love of fascist and his love of strong leaders. But he is a man of humor, a man of bluster, a man who understands how to use ego and how to use others' egos. And I think that he would have been very dedicated to avoiding nuclear war. So
did you see the post from Nicole Shanahan where she was lambasting the Democrats signing missiles or weapons that were being prepped?
That was disgusting. And that was the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, who was passed over, by the way, by Kamala Harris. He was in the final running for her consideration as vice president, and was passed over, I would say, specifically because of his fervor for the Israel attacks that have been going on at that time with Hamas and now with Hezbollah. So, and I also saw Base Mike Lee, my favorite senator, commented on that those missiles should be saved for the protection of American troops. And a great point that he made. So just unbelievable. Look, it's straight out of 1940. Josh Shapiro signing warheads being sent to Israel to rain down upon Lebanon, a sovereign country, a neighbor, and unbelievable. Not only that, but we also saw the 700 plus.
Hey, I don't know if you see it, but look, there's that de-escalation right there. De-escalation through diplomacy. I mean, she's got to be hearkening to the phrase that we're talking about, right?
Absolutely, and so you'll start to notice this de-escalation, and not only escalation, but escalation and de-escalation, and it sits right there next to capacity building and quote unquote democracy. The our favorite word for enforcing our will. If we gave up on safety a long time ago, gave up on defense, and just said, well, we're going to push democracy on these people so that we can have an excuse to send our military in and have our way with their political processes. But there it is, de-escalation. So there was also the letter that, in the 2020 election, we had the 51 spies that lied letter, the 51 leaders of the CIA and FBI that issued a letter that they all signed that gave Joe Biden cover for the Hunter Biden laptop. And if you look into the details of the letter, it doesn't outright lie, but it is dishonest as can be with regards to what they knew and what they didn't know about. They were using a denial. We cannot confirm that the laptop wasn't manipulated by Russian insertions as to the content in the laptop. Yes, and now we have seen not only Republicans or neocons, the likes of Dick Cheney and the Bushes and whatever, Liz Cheney, any number of other Republicans pivoting or leaving the Republican Party to support Kamala Harris. But now we have, what, 700 plus members of the CIA, the FBI, and the military signing a letter that they support the Harris campaign. And it has everything.
Well, that's got to be in reaction to the Trump campaign saying that they're going to clean house inside those organizations, right?
I would say, moreover, it has everything to do with Donald Trump's statements with regards to NATO and you know, if we give up on the NATO project, the reasoning behind the reliance on the military to you know, further the American agenda around the world begins to wane, and these people are probably thinking about their jobs, about their yes, they see the world in a certain way, but their assumption that we will always have the upper hand is incredibly dangerous to the American people. And a great politician understands that, and understands that the most subtle art of war is that of diplomacy. And we do have to, we will have to give up some of the territory that the United States has claimed. I mean, we've claimed all the world except for the remnants of the Soviet Union, and may have had outsized influence there. But our plan to limit the oil and gas production around the world, and that's truly what our plan has been for some time, is to limit oil and gas production around the world so that we could sell, especially liquefied natural gas, to Europe, to other countries that border Russia. You know, we wanted to. The reason that we have people like Hunter Biden on Burisma, a gas company in Ukraine, and the reason that we bombed the Nord Stream pipeline is because we wanted Europe to be buying this liquefied petroleum. Look also how this deals with. Did you happen to see Fetterman, senator from Pennsylvania, with his remarks towards fracking?
No, I didn't catch that. Was that in the last couple of days?
Yeah, it was in the last couple of days. He was, as usual, dressed up.
Let me pull it up.
Okay, yeah, go find it. He's in a white hoodie, so if you see him in a white hoodie. But he is pressed by a reporter with regards to his stance on fracking. And of course, he's not going to say no to fracking. Why? Because fracking may have some impact in the Permian Basin, in which we have large oil reserves, but it has the greatest impact in the shale in Pennsylvania. And the reason that we have been so hell-bent on curbing Russian production of natural gas for the last 10, 15 years has been with the discovery of the technology of fracking, and the realization that we had massive reserves of natural gas to sell around the world. So that meant jobs for Americans, and something that we could sell that had been previously untapped. And so here we have Fetterman, who just over and over will not say that he supports fracking, which he does. And instead we could play the clip, but meh. Instead every time the reporter asks him like 3 times, it's almost like he denies Christ thrice. But every time the reporter asks him whether or not he supports fracking and why he's changed his position, he says, well, the Republicans are talking about eating cats and dogs. And so again, notice there this the subterfuge of turning the conversation towards immigration and towards turning the conversation to immigration, rather than having a discussion about fracking, about American jobs, and about our international policies that are backing those up, so that we can find markets to sell all that gas to.
And Kamala Harris is she said she supports fracking, but there's a lot of videos that says she doesn't support fracking at all. So this is kind of a big issue amongst the entire election cycle, right?
It's an underlying issue, but I think more importantly is the question of do we support coercing the rest of the world into buying the things that we produce? And this is also why I think Trump's conversation with regards to tariffs and raising the tariffs for goods that are made outside of the United States is one that understands that we cannot continue to depend on our military to secure and force the hands of politicians around the world to buy the things that we want them to buy. And using, a real Republican talks about open markets. Libertarian talks about the power of markets. But we have done so for quite some time and turned a blind eye to the enforcement mechanism that was confounding that system throughout the world. And Trump's acknowledgement of that and his turn towards talking about tariffs but even Harris does so in her own ways, because when we start talking about setting prices and the government's role inside of country, that is a truer conversation than pretending that markets around the world are going to settle it and then sending the military out to secure those markets.
Speaking of U.S. production, did you see that TSMC said that they're shipping chips from the United States?
I did see that. And we also begin to understand how important it is, if we're to have some sort of nation state security and network security, that we produce and make things ourselves. Because what devastating effect was Israel able to have on Lebanon, to Hezbollah, with their pager bombs and the bombs that they placed in the electron. I'm not sure if it was iPhones or what, but
it was walkie-talkies.
Yes, walkie-talkies. Thank you, Rusty. To the pagers and the walkie-talkies that they intercepted and somehow manipulated to turn into bombs that they could then electronically activate by abusing network security. So it's very important. If I like both the idea of making things at home. We have plenty of resources in the United States. It's a massive country, and if we're going to be making things, we might as well be making them at home. So yep. And this is in Arizona. TSMC. What does TSMC stand for, Grant?
Taiwan Semiconductor.
Oh, interesting. And what is Taiwan but the carve out in China that the United States has held on to for so long?
It was my understanding that one of the reasons for locating this chip fab plant was because there's a nuke plant right next to it. So they have this plethora of power available at this spot, and that's what makes it an attractive spot to do chip fab.
Did you also see the deal that Apple signed with the old 3 mile?
Was it Microsoft did that, right? Was it Apple?
Okay, yeah, Microsoft. Okay, well, Microsoft also piggybacking and an eye towards reopening the nuclear facility there. So that will.
Well, this is where it's hypothesized that if we're going to achieve the sorts of artificial general intelligence that some suspect may be possible, although there's a lot of disagreement about how much progress has really been made on in AI and whether the talking rocks are just some sort of glorified parrot or if they actually are exhibiting true intelligence. But it's theorized that AGI is going to take so much power that we have to bring on a significant amount of nuclear capacity. And so this is partially why you see this rush from big tech companies securing massive amounts of power, because they want They want to keep all those GPUs hot and fired up, see if they can get to AGI.
Well, I'm dubious about the prospects of AI, but I do understand that the government favors sectors, and some sectors are sexy, and AI is sexy right now. Not only sexy, but centralized rather than decentralized, and something that's easier to control. So, as we move from reliance on product chains that are outside the United States, and deal with production of things, and also not just things but also jobs here in the United States, perhaps we will see an alliance between more tech sector and nuclear sites around the world. There's also, of course, there's also other sources of electricity that keep electricity cheap. I'm thinking of the Columbia River and the Columbia River Dam, and some data centers being put out there in Eastern Washington. So maybe we'll see more of those sites sort of change the relationships of politics around the world. Microsoft is in Eastern Washington because of the collapse of the logging industry, and just as the spotted owl was bringing down logging in Eastern Washington, they made an offer that Microsoft couldn't refuse. Do you know where Microsoft was before then?
Silicon Valley?
Albuquerque, New Mexico, same place that Intuit was, like the cheap land and the or the cheap property, and that's a whole different discussion as to why New Mexico was cheaper and was being eyeballed in the 90s as the place that the tech sector was going to move next. It had a lot to do. Well, we kept New Mexico after the Mexican-American War of 1850. We kept it as a territory of the United States and under a territorial governor and under the control of the military, so that it would remain loyal to the United States. So and intentionally also handicapped the economy of New Mexico for quite some time. And so then it was ripe for nuclear research and nuclear production. So
as far as Scott Ritter goes, are you keeping a close eye on his account? Is he frequently speaking on these topics? Do you expect to see more developments? Is this one that I don't think we usually tell people that they should follow somebody, but I'm curious if you're keeping a close eye on what he's saying, and if you think there'll be further developments coming.
My notifications are on for Scott Ritter. He is very direct, very to the point, a good source of information. And again, I don't know of many Americans who are having conversation with the Russians. So if we want to keep a finger on what's going there, Scott Ritter is a great source for that conversation. There's I would say the only person that I pay more attention to than Scott Ritter is Mike Benz, and Mike Benz's exposés on what's going on with the State Department, the CIA, the FBI, the security apparatus, and their actions is the only other source of information I find more riveting today.
All right, well, we'll keep an eye on it. I think we're at the end of the show, so very interesting stuff. I'm concerned, obviously. I didn't hear much from this in the mainstream media, so as usual, X is the place to go to get the real intel, inside stories. So we'll keep an eye on it and keep everybody updated if we hear anything else. But take a look at Scott Ritter's account if you found this interesting today.
All right, thanks for having the conversation. I'll see y'all tomorrow.